Real True Education, not fake news. It's the 22nd of October 2020. You're welcome back. This is number 13F, on the SCA ruling, which we've just got, and a bit on the history of it. Now, for many people watching my videos, you might find this heavy weather, but I know that people are depending on to get a bit of a grasp of this. I've spent 12 years studying this stuff. I know a bit about ordinary law, criminal and civil law, but when it comes to many of the planning laws, they're unbelievably complex and unbelievably difficult. So what I claim to know a bit about is the SCA directive, the Aarhus Convention, and the EIA directive, the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive at local level. When it comes to the Habitats Directive, I'm a wee bit at sea. I have a fantastic grasp of the Birds Directive. So I'm only going to talk about what I know about and our recent victory, which I think is groundbreaking. I'm so happy about. Okay. So the first thing I have to do is tell you the name of the video, because I'll be telling people this. That's F for Foxtrot. Okay. And I have to give a disclaimer. When you give legal advice and you're not my client and I'm not your lawyer, I have to put in a disclaimer. This is the best I can do. But someone might use this in some way that costs them money or something, and I cannot be held accountable. What I'm doing here is giving you my best understanding of it as best I can, and I have referred to other people as well. But if you use it, you have to be careful. You have to go and study it yourself and make sure you're happy with it. It's your decision to take judicial reviews or anything else. I have to put in that because I was advised to do that when I was doing my business studies course in 1999 to 2003. Now we're talking here about the ruling of C-24 19, and you'll get that by going into Info Curia. Oh God, folks, sorry. I got it wrong here. Info, right? See that? So go into, sorry, I put down the wrong letter. That can happen. Info, I-N-F-O, C-U-R-I-A. Info Curia. And then you put in CJEU, Court of Justice of the EU. And then you put in the case. So for this case, you would put in Curia, C-U-R-I-A, Info, I-N-F-O, Info Curia, ruling CJEU, ruling C-24 19. Okay, that's the way you put it in. Put in Info Curia, CJEU, and then put in the number of the ruling, which will begin with a C. Okay. Now, there is the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU, which we look at a later stage. I have to get the nub of this in and then develop it in later videos. There'll be nothing now on number 13 series except this type of thing. If you're not interested in it, don't be looking at it. I mean, people look at other stuff. In these videos, I am not really giving out about anybody or saying, oh, these crowd done this or the government's corrupt. I want to get across what I believe the law to be. So there'll be a bit of giving out, but not that much. Because if you're doing something or you're making a decision on whether to challenge something, or whether you're making a submission to planning, you need to know what's accurate, because you're dealing with Bord Pleanála and the local planning authority and the High Court, and that they won't be into political corruption. There's elections for that. They always fail, so let them off. So there's the Treaty on the Function of the EU, which I will deal with later, and there's the Lisbon Treaty, but those treaties had in it a high level of protection for the environment and measures to control the environment and to look after the environment and involve the public in it. And I read them. I remember sitting in the car at the farm with the Sunday Times supplement and reading the conditions of the Lisbon Treaty. And I saw that in it. And there were several other things it guaranteed. And on that basis, I voted yes to the EU, and I recommended other people vote the same. Those two elections on that. Okay. Now, the European Court of Justice is the guardian of the treaties. Its function is to guard the treaties that we agreed to. All nice so far. And big time in the treaties of the EU is the subsidiarity principle, that Ireland and other countries are below in the pecking order of law. The Court of Justice of the EU, they're lower down. But there has to be proportionality. That's all about assessing and making sure that everything is done. Now, after the fall of the communist countries in Eastern Europe following the fall of the Berlin Wall, it was remarked that tin pot dictators and communists, and maybe not all communists, maybe capitalists as well, they wrecked the environment. They built big things in front of lovely old castles in Europe and destroyed the whole place. And they decided, the EU, that one of the big tenets of their rule was to be protection of the environment, because it's hard to get individual countries. I mean, in Ireland, where you have the Fianna Fáil and the Fine Gael and the Sinn Féin hackling over potholes somewhere, how do you get them to look after the wider environment? So one of the things that the EU was meant to do was to look after the wider situation and protect the citizen. Not strictly democratic, because the EU isn't strictly democratic, but still that was a laudable and an admirable quality, and it was written into the treaties. So one of the things here that I'll be doing, when I get to about 18 minutes, I'm going to stop and start a new one, because I don't want people to be watching for too long. Now, the Aarhus Convention was brought out in the wake of this about in the late 90s, and this was signed at Aarhus in Denmark, and it was a treaty among all the countries, Ireland and the EU, and many countries, to protect the rights of the native people living in the midst of all this development and all that. And then there's the Maastricht Recommendations, and they are published online, the Maastricht Recommendations, and they deal with guidelines for the SEA, the Strategic Assessment of Plans and Programmes, and then the EIA. They go back to front. So they're online there, and you can get them, the Maastricht Recommendations. I think I have it spelled right there. If there's minor mistakes in spelling, please don't hold me to it. Now, so those recommendations were brought out. But what's key to all this is that the EU promised to bring out legislation, and the two pieces that I'm familiar with is the SEA directive, brought out in 2004, and the EIA directive was brought out in 1985. Now, there's a concept called the binding part of a judgment, the binding part, and that's known as the ratio dicatendi. And this applies in English law, big time, in American law and Irish law, but it applies in the EU to an extent too. And then there's persuasive. So the ratio dicatendi, and then there's the arbiter dictum, and then there's the irrelevant. So the ratio dicatendi is the kernel of the judgment, the piece that sticks, the real piece. This must be done. The persuasive part is the arbiter dictum. It's about the way. It's where a court makes a comment that if we had to be asked this question, this is what we would say as well. And that's persuasive. So the difference in a ratio dicatendi is that it's binding. So if the High Court in Dublin gives it, or the Supreme Court gives a judgment, that's binding on all lower courts. If it only gives an arbiter dictum, it may not be binding, but it's persuasive in the arguments. Okay. And then there's irrelevant. What's irrelevant? Coswallop. Doesn't apply. There's some name on that, I don't know. Now, in 1963, the Planning and Development Act was brought out in Ireland, and before that, they were building houses out in the middle of the road, and I have two old houses on my farm, and the two of us built out in the middle of the road. Oh Lord, I can't even fix the roof on one of them because there's a public road going by it. Oh, what a mess. And even up another way here, the same happened. So they were trying to save land, so that brought out and that finished, that crack. So development in the Planning and Development Act 1963, which was updated and is now called the Planning and Development Act 2000. Right, 2000. So I'm going to change that now. They really dug into it and they changed it in 2000. And for all intents and purposes, we're talking about the Planning and Development Act 2000. See that there? So the 63 Act is rarely done because they updated it big time, and it's 2000, and then it's amended by subsequent legislation. So I'm just telling you that for the historical point. And a development means work to land. W-O-R-K, to land. Work to land and land use. Work to land. People say it's, I remember a builder telling me, oh, it's any permanent structure. No, it's work to land. Okay. Now, the next thing we look at the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive 337 of 1985, and that was brought out in 1985 and was amended by a similar directive which updated it 201/92 EC, and that's the one that now counts. It's just drafted better, and there's some changes. No time to go into that here. And it was updated again in 2014, and instead of having an environmental impact statement, it's now an environmental impact report. What difference that has, I don't know. But broadly speaking, the 2014 one only slightly amended the 2011 one. So my button is still flashing, so just in case anything happens, I'll be putting this up whether I get finishing off or not. Now, in 2010, and not until then, the EIA directive, that's the local EIA directive. Remember, you have a development, that's like building a cattle shed, or maybe say a hay shed, or a garage for the car. You have a project that needs an EIA. That would be a quarry, a wind farm, or whatever, a project, maybe a shed for processing oil that might need an EIA. And then there's a public plan or programme which overarches the whole lot. That'll be like the National Renewable Energy Action Plan, or the River Management Act, or town and country planning. Maybe a ruling by government that all councils are going to have some type of a development plan, or for houses in their county or whatever, or for development. So that's what they are now. So the EIA directive is written into Irish law after 2010 by section 172 of the Planning and Development Act, part 10 of the Planning and Development Act. Section 172 under part 10 of the Planning and Development Act, and there are several sections underneath that. And don't be going into the Planning and Development Act 2000, you need to go into the revised, updated one, and it shows in red the amendments, and that is good. It's actually, have to praise government for doing that, because otherwise you'd be going back looking at what it amended. You'd be checking, oh, is that amended? I wonder, you'd see that it said such a thing in 2000. I wonder, was that amended? It's all in this revised thing, and you know the red writing, and it gives the references. And in reality, if you hadn't that, it'd be a nightmare for lawyers, for the courts, and for the likes of me. So I'm praising that situation. And what's more, even there might be errors there. If the error is only in relation to that publication, no court will hold against you. It has to be reasonable. Okay, so the revised or updated or consolidated, it used some of the three words. You'll know it anyway when you see it. Okay, now section 50B of the Planning and Development Act 2010 or 11, I'm not just too sure, about 2010 anyway, talks about costs. And if it's under the SEA, the pollution control. Now, funny enough, with cost protection order, the Planning and Development Act is not included. You can't get a cost protection order if they won't give you permission for your hay shed. Or if your neighbour is building a garage for his tractor, you have to go in and pay the cost yourself. But if you win, he could have to pay. Right? But pollution is one. If it's pollution control, you get a protective cost order. If it's a strategic environmental assessment one, you get it. And if it's an EIA, an environmental impact assessment one, you get it. Have you that? So you have the SEA, the EIA, and the pollution control. Okay. Now there's a case a while back where a Sligo man, he had a foreign name, I can't remember his name rightly, but he got caught for costs in a case he took. I think it was against a wind farm, and he got caught for 80,000. And he had to go himself right through to the process of the European Court, and I think they let him off there. So there was a transitional period where this wasn't being accepted by the courts. Now the thing about the cost is, if you have to, there's two things. If you revisit a subject that has been well trashed out already and dealt with, and you spend 2 days trying to argue something that has already been completed and maybe settled by the Supreme Court or EU law, you could lose your costs. So if I went in and argued that a particular case, SEA case, didn't exist or something, you could be caught for costs. On the other hand, if you misbehave and kick up a racket and throw the books all over the place and fire the pen at the judge or the clerk, that would be considered you don't deserve it. But in reality, that's ridiculous. You wouldn't be arguing something that's so far out. You'd be arguing something that's poignant and really urgent and necessary, and you'd also be behaving yourself. So it's not a big problem. In the 2 cases I took, I got costs. I got in one of them against the cabling here, there was no EIA done. They give it retention planning permission, and under section 4 of the Planning and Development Act, section 5, they can give Section 40 says there must be planning permission, as Section 32 does, but Section 5 says you can have retention planning permission, and you can have exempted development. That's what I'm trying to get. So there's planning permission, there's exempted development, and there's retention to keep something already there. And under the EIA directive, you cannot get retention if an EIA is needed. Okay, so I challenged that. They tried to get out of doing an EIA for the cables here in Iran, and I challenged it on the grounds there had to be an EIA, and I won, and I got my costs. You only get your own, you don't get your expert costs. I got €2,300 cash checked from Bord Pleanála when I won that case. And in the case of the one I took against the pylons, I had to pay 400. There was talk about costing 100,000 to take a judicial review. I took a 2-day one in the High Court in Dublin. It was court number 12, I think it was, and I only had to pay the stamp duty. It come to $4.99. That's what it cost me with the stamp duty. It cost me nothing else. This thing about it cost 50,000. That's only if you got caught for the other side's costs. But if you stay within the ambit of Section 50B, you can't be caught. Okay. So now the next thing is I'm here now on 16 minutes, and we look at NEP's case, North East Pylon Pressure. Took a case in which some good law was settled on Irish law, but they took a case, and it was a mix of the EIA. Lucky they put in the EIA, and they put in the Planning and Development Act, and they put in Irish law about land ownership and all that. And the judge awarded costs against them. They said you have to pay the other person's costs, and I think it was €125,000 they were caught for. Now they had a bit of a purse gathered up, I think. Anyway, they fought that through to the European Court, and you can get to the Supreme Court in Dublin without leave on costs. Costs is the one area you don't need leave to get from the High Court to the old Supreme Court, and you can go on to the European Court of Justice. But I remember reading the Advocate General's opinion. He's before it goes into the court, he gives his ruling, and he said it would be unfair if somebody who has EIA, European law, and local law mixed up to make them pay for the cost, that they should get off without the cost, and I think they didn't have to pay. I never followed up that one, but I believe they got off on that grounds. So this is a problem where you have a mix of law, but you could be caught for the cost if you only put in the EIA as an afterthought, and then ran for 3 days on Irish law or who owns land or whatever like that. I'm only saying that's what I believe happened. I haven't the full thing of that, and that's one thing about this channel where we don't know. We will tell you what we know and what we don't know. Now, so back a while, the EU Commission took a case 5009 against Ireland. They took a case 5009 against Ireland, and that case was because what the Irish government was doing and the developers were doing, they were demolishing listed buildings, lovely buildings, demolishing everything they could, and some of these buildings had historic history, and the EU made them change it. And in the 2001 Planning and Development Regulations, they made them change it to include the demolition of buildings. In other words, it was an exempted development. Demolishing buildings was an exempted development, and it shouldn't have been, because demolishing the buildings is just as bad. And I mean, way back in Dublin, in the Viking site where the Dublin civic offices are, disgracefully they built the civic offices over them. That couldn't happen now under EU law, and that's a good thing. Father F.X. Martin went to jail over that. Disgraceful what they'd done, destroyed the whole history of Dublin. And then with 1,700 acres above the Phoenix Park, they needed a good kicking, badly they did. So the thing about it is, anyway, that's the case 5009. Now that's illegal. You have to get it for the demolition of certain buildings. And recently they demolished the house of the O'Reilly, the 1916 Fenian leader and Irish IRA freedom fighter, and they demolished his house. And this is the crack that's going on. And the Shelbourne Hotel pulled away 2 statues, and I hope to write to them they better put them back, because if they don't, I might go in and under Section 160 of the Planning and Development Act and make them pull them back. So all these business people just want to knock down all around them, and the Irish government's fully behind them, and that's a political statement. I agree with it. So that's what happened in the 5009. We now move on to case C26118. C26118. It's written in small writing there, folks. I don't know if you can see it there. I hope you can see it there. 261 18, and you can go in and check the structure there yourself. And this is where they built the Derrybrine wind farm with no proper EIA. They never assessed the effects of the mud falling into the river, the turf and all falling into the river and killing 55,000 fish. And so the EU took them to task on that, and we're paying 15,000 a day and a fine of 5 million a year. Now the question is, could I take a case on the Derrybrine wind farm? Could I actually, under these judgments? This is something I won't answer you right now. We're looking at that. Now the SEA directive came out in 2004, and its number is 2001-42 EC, and the two instruments that brought it in are 436 and 437. Statutory instrument 436 and 437, and 436 is about the average stuff like quarries, wind farms, pylons, all that stuff, and 437 is about town and country planning, which you'll see is included in Article 3.2 of the SEA directive. And so they brought it in two separate ways, and this really relates to councils who do what do you call them, zonings and all this stuff. That has to be subject to an EIA. An SEA has to be subject. It's not done, of course. They need to do another one, and they don't do it right. We'll go into that at a later stage. That's the situation there with that. So it's SEA, that's the directive. Now I am now on 21 minutes, and I have a good lot more to go through here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop now, folks, let you get a cup of tea and come back again to me in a few minutes, and it'll be another video, and I'm going to make that immediately now. So I have all the stuff here, but just to give you a break and not have it too long, and then if anything goes wrong I lose the whole lot. Okay, thank you, we'll see you back.